coming, everybody. All I got to say is they got a basketball court, ping pong tables, and they even have one of those ball toss things, you know? So, like, I think I'm just going to quit everything I do and come work here. And I think they were hired, didn't you say, Don, for head basketball court manager. That's what I want to be. Senior basketball court manager. Somebody else can run the ping pong tables. But. All right, so for those that do not know me, my name is Dan Wahlin. I live in Chandler, so it's pretty awesome to come, pretty much I can go home to my own bed tonight. That's nice. I travel a lot, so it's always great to be in town. How many, as we get started here, are brand new to Angular 2, just so I know? All right, how many of you are brand new to like TypeScript at all? Okay, how many are actively using TypeScript? ES6. Okay, cool. So good. So this is kind of, I gave a talk, I don't know, 6 or so months ago, I think it was, at the NG kind of meetup. And this will be a sort of updated version of that because there's been some new things coming out. If you haven't kept up with Angular 2 and the progress, release candidate 6 just came out about 2 hours ago, and I am proud to say I have already updated 2 of the demos I'm going to show. The third did not work, so there's a good thing we have a little revert option in the editor. But what we're going to do, my goal tonight, for those that maybe haven't played with this as much, is kind of get you comfortable with sort of the different road trip spots you need to know about if you're going to be doing Angular. And I'm guessing, are most of you doing Angular 1 right now? A lot of people doing Angular 1? Okay. Anybody doing like React? Doing both? You got an Angular shirt and you're doing React, so you need both, right? Yeah, cool. All right, so let's go ahead and jump right in. We have a good enough size here that if we do have some questions, shoot away. If we start getting low on time, I'll probably have to push them to the end, but we'll try to kind of be a little more interactive here. So my kind of background on this stuff, when I first got started with Angular, I'm going to have to admit I hated it. There was very little docs at the time. I didn't get how everything fit together, and once I understood how factories and services and all that fun stuff work, it was cool. And anyone's seen, I have a video up on YouTube called AngularJS in 60 minutes, and that was where I kind of finally put all the pieces together, and I said, hey, I'm gonna make a video about this. Angular 2, in my opinion, really solidifies a lot of the concepts that in Angular 1 work great. Don't get me wrong, I still love Angular 1. We still build apps through my company in Angular 1. But, how many have been, like, for instance, asked this question? What's the difference between a factory and a service and a provider and this, right? Because there's a lot of similarities. Angular 2, you're going to see, really clarifies that. The team, when they made the decision to move from Angular 1 to start development for Angular 2, I was on a very lengthy email chain. And the email chain had Igor, who was, Igor's kind of the team lead, and Misko. Misko's the guy that wrote Angular, and then John Poplin and Ward Bell. And so it was, when they first came out with this, they're announcing all these new things, and everybody's freaking out, right? And you'll see that there are definitely some new things, but I think they're very good things, in my opinion. And so it was so bad that I had the vibrate on the phone on, but my wife finally was like, turn off your phone. Because the whole night we're emailing back and forth about, no, you got to do this, and no, you got to do this. And, so that was, almost 2 years ago now. And now we're to where Angular 2 is, and today, as I mentioned, release candidate 6 just came out, literally about 2 hours ago. So we're getting closer and closer to the final release. If you have a background with what I'm going to call true framework at all, you're probably going to love Angular 2 because it's very structured in the way you build your apps. I don't know if anybody's building some really serious enterprise scale, a lot of code apps, but I think the maintenance story is going to get much better as we move into this. Now, that's not to say you can't do that with Angular 1, because you can, but you got to think it through a little bit better there with some patterns and things like that. So let's jump on in here. So I'm going to give you guys access to the slides, and that'll have some different content you can get to. I want to thank Carvana for setting this all up, and it's great to be here. I was watching with Don, who's the guy that was talking up here, how they actually have a car dispenser. I don't know if you guys have seen this. It's like going to a vending machine, but it actually dispenses cars. And I was just like, holy cow, pretty high-tech stuff. So very cool. All right, if you are interested in getting to the content, there is a Carvana guest Wi-Fi. So if you want to get on, I believe they will be happy to let you on. And this is where you can pretty much get to the slides. I'm using Bitly here, so it is case sensitive, just as a heads up. Bitly's kind of case sensitive. So feel free to get to this. There's going to be a lot of links in here. That one you won't have to keep taking a picture. Just that one right there will get you to this. It's up on Google Slides. So if I change anything, then you will see that change instantly. All right, so the goal I mentioned today is we're going to walk through several kind of spots of Angular that we want to stop at to learn kind of where things going with JavaScript. I mentioned that when they were working on Angular 1 and decided to add these different features we're going to get into for Angular 2, they had kind of a hard decision to make. They could keep going down the road they were going with Angular 1, which is working very well. It works very well for us. But Angular 1 was originally conceived, over 5 years ago if you count the internal work that they did. And so think about 5 years ago, and I'm trying to remember when the first iPhone came out, but it wasn't, I think it was maybe 8 years ago or so, the first iPhone. Think how much has changed in those, 5 years with browsers. And so for those that are kind of new to this Angular 2 stuff we're going to cover, they had to make a decision. Do we keep doing what we're doing, or do we go ahead and jump on board let's do the cool stuff, right? Let's jump on, leverage the features of the browser, leverage mobile as much as we can, all those types of things. That's what Angular 2 you're going to see can do. All right, so let's jump on in here. Let me show you. So once you get to that link, I use an editor. There's a lot of editors nowadays. I use VS Code. That's my favorite editor now because I run on Mac mostly. So I do have a bunch of snippets. I'll show you some of those as we kind of move along here. So if you guys are interested in some code snippets that are up to date with the latest release candidate, then this will have those. All right, so we're going to get started with kind of a big picture, and then we'll jump into modules and components. And that's really where the interesting stuff comes into play. Angular just changed in the last release candidate one big kind of final big API tweak, and they added a new module feature. Now, those that are doing Angular 1, you're already used to modules, right? Because pretty much everything you do in Angular 1 is through modules. Well, in Angular 2, up until, a month or so ago, there wasn't actually a module concept. There was ES6 modules, which we'll also talk about. But Angular 2 itself didn't really have that, and at the time they were thinking they didn't need it. Well, that's changed, so we'll be talking about some new things. So if you haven't looked at Angular in the last 3 to 4 weeks, then there's some new stuff I'll show you with that. We're going to dive into some of the template syntax. We'll do some kind of demos for that, show you how it works, and then we'll wrap up with some services and routing. So let's look at the big picture here real quick. As I mentioned, when Angular 2 first started, they had to kind of make a decision. Do we keep doing what we're doing, which is kind of 5 years old, or do we go ahead and just rewrite the whole system and leverage the new features that are out there? So they went ahead and said, nope, we're going to move to the new stuff. Now, I'm glad. At the time, I wasn't glad. I think everybody, we get so invested in our framework and our technology that you're like, no, do not move things at all. Just keep going. Well, the problem is, I guarantee in a year from now, had they not done what they've done, we would call it the caveman framework. Because there's just so much that's changed over the last 5 years that's what would end up happening. So let's jump into the big picture. So for those that came to the other talk, you'll recognize some of this, but there'll be some new stuff as well. So Angular 2 is all about components. Now, you could do this in Angular 1. How many have written a custom directive by chance? And how many found that just the simplest thing you've ever done when you first started? Yeah, no liars in here. That's good. They're not the easiest to get started. They're easy once you know, but it's like anything. I always say, it's advanced until you know how to do it, then it ceases to be advanced, right? So with Angular 2, they have vastly simplified how you can componentize your app. And I like to think of it as like Lego blocks. So you have a calendar component and a grid component, a menu, a header, and a data grid, or some other type of, maybe you have a dashboard, you're going to be doing widgets on there. And with Angular 1, you wouldn't really think in terms of components unless you love writing custom directives. You would think in terms of controllers and views, right? That's pretty much kind of how it works. Nothing wrong with that. Now the good news is that same exact concept is absolutely going to carry over to Angular 2 if you haven't played with it. So what you've been doing is actually, you can do the same thing. I just think it's much easier once you get the hang of it. So we'll talk about that coming up. So basically what that means is now your app can be composed of these different parts. And just like with Angular 1, if you had a part of the app or kind of X marks the spot or ng view or UI view or whatever you use, we could substitute that out and fly in a different component. Very similar. Now, like I said, we could do this in Angular 1, but it pretty much meant you would have to either use partials and use like ng include, or you'd have to write a custom directive. Nothing wrong with that. But directives are kind of one of those specialized skills that not everybody knows how to do them. So now we have a little fun with maintenance, right? Because if somebody leaves the job and they were the head directive writer, now you're kind of bummed because who's going to maintain that? All right, so bottom line though, same thing as Angular 1 that way. We can still do the same types of things. So let's kind of relax, take a step back, and let's talk about the really high-level things you need to know to get started with Angular 2 on our little road trip here. This place, I found this picture and went, man, that is the cabin I want right there. I think it's Italy or something like that from what I remember. So I'm going, yeah, I was just in Italy a month ago. I didn't see that. But anyway, so let's jump on in here. So the first thing is, what language do you choose? You can do ES5. This is probably what most of you, I'm guessing, are using for Angular 1. Some of you might have already jumped to ES6 or TypeScript for Angular 1, which that's kind of what we do. We do TypeScript for Angular 1 now. But you can do ES5. I don't like ES5 way at all for Angular 2. I think it's kind of nasty, actually. But if you want to jump right to the next version, ES6, ES 2015, whatever you want to call it, there's just some really cool features. If you're not familiar with some of those, you'll see some coming up. It's the biggest change to the language, well, pretty much since the 10 days it took to write. All right, ES7, that's kind of actively being worked on as far as the spec. It's not approved, but it has some cool new features that Angular is already including. For instance, decorators are one of those we're going to talk about, or some people might call them annotations, but they're decorators. And then if you're new to TypeScript, TypeScript is a superset of ES6. And this is what, of course, Angular 2 is written in, is TypeScript. So what's so cool about this is if you want to use ES6 and just leverage these new features. One example that some people love and some people hate is classes. Now you have full-on class support. So if you come from a Java background or C# or C++ or whatever it may be, you're actually going to feel right at home if you go ES6. The cool thing is though, with ES6, if you're a functional programming person, you can still stick with that too. Now Angular, having said that, does use classes, just as a heads up. So there are going to be classes involved. We're going to be seeing that shortly. So what I'm going to be showing you today, all the code is going to be TypeScript code, which is pretty much, I call it ES6++. Because what it does in a nutshell is it adds type support, optionally. You don't have to. But if you want to track if this variable is a number, a string, an array, a Boolean, and that's about all you get, those four main ones. Or if you want to even create custom interfaces, so anyone that has a background where you've created interfaces, you can do that with TypeScript. It's freaking awesome. We've never had that. If you ever had two JavaScript objects and you want to drive consistency between them, you better just make sure you compare the files real close. Because there's not really a great way to do that, right? That's in the language anyway. With TypeScript, you can actually do that, which is very, very cool for enterprising type apps, I've found. So we'll look at that coming up. Now, the key building blocks, these are the four main ones that we're going to talk about today. So modules are a huge deal. not only ES6 modules. So if you're new to ES6, we're going to be seeing that. But then there's this new module, which is the Angular 2 modules. We'll learn about something called NG module in just a little bit here. Components. These are the Lego blocks of your apps. So instead of thinking in terms of the big view with a controller behind it, which a lot of us kind of start out that way, and then maybe you chop up the view into directives and NG includes and stuff like that. Well, now, from an architecture standpoint, you're going to be thinking more in terms of reusable building blocks, reusable Legos. That if you have a data grid, for instance, I was just out in California with a company talking about Angular 2 with them, and they have a really heavy sort of tendency to show lots and lots of grids in the admin screens. It was a healthcare system. And as a result, they needed a reusable data grid. Well, they had a guy that was working on it. We kind of teamed up a little bit while I was out there, and he's working on that. Already has it done and working. And so now they drop in a data grid tag. Give it a data source, and voila. Now, could you do that in Angular 1? Absolutely. You write a directive, right? And so the bottom line is, what you've learned for those that have done Angular 1, you'll see a lot of it carries over. But I would call it more of a conceptual compatibility, not a code compatibility. You're not going to be able to take your Angular 1 apps and just move them to Angular 2 because there are a lot of differences, which I know sounds kind of like a bummer. And for really big apps, at this point, I'm recommending, hey, if the app's working, why even worry about it? Keep going with it while it's working. It's not, I'll admit, I'm one of those like on my iPhone. As soon as an update, comes on an app I like, I'm like, okay, I'll get it right now. In fact, while I was sitting up here, I did some updates. I'm a little OCD that way. But people get all freaked out. Oh, Angular 2 is going to come out. We got to rewrite the whole app. Why? Angular 1's working fine. Keep using it. They're still going to support it. They got a full-time guy in London, super cool guy, Peter Bacon-Darwin, and he's the guy that's driving that part of the team. That's doing the we're on 1.5.8 right now on Angular 1. And they're still working on that. They will until they see like 0 people give crap with Angular 1. And they've already committed to that. All right, so getting back to this. Components you can kind of think of as like directives in Angular 1. Now there are directives in Angular 2, you're going to see. But there's a very, very small subset of directives. About, I think Brad Green said in a talk he gave, he's the director of the team, I think he said there was 43 Angular 1 directives that are no longer needed anymore in Angular 2. Why? Because there's a whole new way of doing data binding that's freaking awesome. It's one of those things you see it, some of you have, I know, and you go, man, why didn't they think of that like 5 years ago? And the answer is, I think 5 years ago, the browsers probably didn't consistently support it well enough to be able to do that. It's probably the short answer. All right, so we'll talk about those quite a bit. Decorators. If anyone's ever worked with a language that supports metadata in your code, a good example would be Java annotations, C# attributes, those type of things, then that's exactly what decorators are. This is a way to add some metadata about your code. We're going to be seeing that a whole bunch as well. And then finally, I mentioned earlier, I kind of joked about how I think one of the #1 Stack Overflow posts, or it used to be, on Angular 1 was what was the difference between factories and services. And it was really confusing when you first started because you had factories and services and providers and value and constants, and there's all these options. In Angular 2, there's just one way to do reusable code. It's just called a service. And you're going to see in a moment, it's just a class. It's really, really simple. You can whip out one of these in about 30 seconds. And very easy to use and work with. Now, some things that have changed that are way better. In Angular 1, we had something called dependency injection. So some of you probably are writing your controllers with $scope and injecting it. Others are probably using controller as. I prefer controller as, but it works. I always say that people get all hung up on that. And I always say, my mom, when she visits your app, she really isn't asking me, hey, did they use scope or did they use controller as? Let's face it, users don't care. So if you're using either of those, you're using controllers. And the scope, whether you use controller as or scope, gets injected at runtime. Right? Because under the covers, controller as still uses $scope under the covers. Well, in this world, we don't need that anymore. Greatly simplified. Did anybody happen to see the Angular team's very first talk? It was when they were in Europe. This was probably about 2 years ago, and they put up all the gravestones for things that were dying. Did anybody see this? They thought they were being funny. They had like the death bell toll, you know, and all this, and they thought it was really funny. And I guess the crowd, I wasn't there, but I guess the crowd actually thought it was funny. Well, then people, though, they just watched the videos online, and that's where everybody started to freak out, because they're saying controllers dead, scope dead, you know, factories dead. And what they didn't make clear is that a lot of it, modules dead. You know, they didn't make clear that the reason they were able to kill off some of this stuff was because, number one, ES6 now natively supports it. So, you know, why are you going to use your custom framework to do something that the language can do? So we'll talk about that coming up. Number two, things like scope, they have a much higher performance way of doing the data binding now. It's more like React. A couple of you have done React. It's much more like React, actually. They even met, believe it or not, with the React team, which is a little weird, but you know, they're all in Silicon Valley. So Brad and Igor, and they went over and actually met with that team, and they shared ideas, you know, back and forth. But Brad's a very open type of guy. All right, so we'll talk about that as well. So let's, here's the big picture. Now, I just updated this literally last night. So this is my sort of Lego block building manual for building the Death Star. You know, when you get started with any framework, you always want to know what are the main pieces and how do they fit together. But you're going to see it's actually pretty dang close to Angular 1, at least from the high level. So there's a new feature. They just introduced this about a month ago, a little less maybe, in RC5. Like I said, RC6 just dropped today. And this particular feature allows you to containerize your code. So we'll be seeing this coming up. It's called modules, but it's very different than ES6 modules. So we'll kind of talk about that. All right, now we still have routes. So a module can define or reference a set of routes. The way they've done routing is immensely better in Angular 2 than it was in Angular 1. Angular 1 works fine, but how many use like UI routing? Quite a few. So, and there's a good reason for that, right? You're like, okay, the NG router doesn't do this, doesn't do this, doesn't do this. Well, they've learned all those lessons. They even brought in a guy that did another third-party router. It's not UI router, but they brought him in to even help with the new one. So one of the big things, we're not going to have time to go into it, but I do have an app I want to show you that uses it, is lazy loading. If anybody has an app that's just so big that you don't want to load everything up front. For instance, maybe you have a feature called orders, and when they click on orders, you want to dynamically download all that orders content. Well, in Angular 1, you could do it. I had a little RxJS trick you could do. You could do OC lazy load. There's these different techniques. But it was actually kind of tricky to lazy load some of your feature set. Angular 2 has fixed that. And they now have a way you can lazy load. And then UI router, they're working on Angular 2 stuff as well. So they'll have a different option, and you can pick what you like best. Now, off of the routes, rather than hanging off a controller and a view, instead, we're going to have components. Now, these are the Lego blocks. And the Lego blocks, this is where it gets very similar to Angular 1. You're going to write some code that drives a template. They don't really refer to them as views, but they're the same thing. So the component code needs to get the data from somewhere. We're going to get that typically from a service. That's actually very, very similar to Angular 1 again. And then it's going to have a way we can bind that data to our templates. Now, you might notice a big missing feature that you would probably in Angular 1 have in the middle, and that would be there's no scope. We don't need it anymore. It's greatly simplified, and the performance, they're saying 3 to 10 times faster. I think I always say let's wait until it gets released, because you can always cook the numbers. I love performance tests where it's like, this is 10 times faster, and then you go analyze what they did, and you're like, that was a pretty unique fringe case you tested there, right? We all kind of find this. All right, so this is kind of the big picture. Now, another thing that's going to happen is you can load other modules. So very similar to Angular 1, right? Some of you probably have some apps where you've divided the app up into modules. You can load those modules in. Well, we're going to have the same type of thing now in Angular 2. Now this top part, the green and the orange there, that just came out in RC5. They actually didn't have that. And so I'll have to admit, the migration from RC4 to 5 was a little more involved. I don't know how that didn't make it in the beta, but it did. So it's a good move, though. You'll see it's a good thing. I'll explain why they did it. All right, so to get started, one of the big things we're going to have to do and use as developers is a brand new way of loading scripts. How many have ever had fun with making sure all your scripts in dev were in the right order? Nobody, right? Never happens that, it's loaded in the wrong order. We won't do that anymore. So if anybody's doing ES6 with ES6 modules, you'll already know this. But for those that aren't, we're going to actually load one main script, and then there's a few helper scripts, but they're third party. We're going to load one main helper script that then kicks off the whole process. We're not going to have in dev, 50, 100, 150 script tags loaded. It's not how it's going to work. The problem with ES5, and this has been a problem for a long time, is number one, global scope. So we all know how to work around that with wrapper functions and stuff like that, and some of the patterns like the revealing module pattern, the module pattern, the prototype pattern, stuff like that. But when it came to a script relying on other scripts, ES5 doesn't have really a way, unless you use like RxJS, I should say, to load those dependencies. Now, if you've done an object-oriented language, like Java, as an example, or C# or Python, or something like that, you'll know that when you write code, you actually say at the top of the file typically, I need this, I need this, I need this, right? It's like your recipe for what you need. We've never really had that in ES5. Now you can do it, but I always thought it was a little hacky. RxJS, for instance, can do it. Not my favorite thing, but it works really well. You just have to know what you're doing. So what we're going to have is a module import system. Now, modules we'll get to in just a sec here, and then we'll jump into some code I'll show you. They are basically a brand new ES6 feature. Think of it as the file itself, the JS or the TS file, is the module. Anything in that file, if you can load it the way I'm going to show you, is going to be loaded not in the global scope. It's going to be its own little force field around the information. So I'll show you that coming up. So what we're going to do then is we're going to be able to import different components. And we're going to register these components with modules. All right, so you'll notice first off, let's go back to step 2 here, you'll notice the class keyword. So if you haven't played at all with ES6 at all, you'll see the number 1 feature right there. And by the way, some people hate it. Some people are pure functional people, and I'm like, hey, use what works. But if you're going to do Angular 2, they use classes. And that's what they went with. Keeps it nice and easy. So what we're going to do is, you'll notice this little ng module up here. This is metadata. This is basically metadata about the code. All right? So rather than having like a separate JSON file or a separate XML file to have your metadata, instead, you just put it right there by the code. Nice and easy. This is an ES7 feature, by the way. So it's not even out yet, but they're already leveraging it. A lot of frameworks are doing this. In fact, the guy that's in charge of Ember is the guy that proposed this in the ES7 spec, Yehuda. So you'll notice that bootstrap there. Well, if you look at step 2, what we're saying is that I would like to load bootstrap app component. Now, right now, app component doesn't do anything, but we'll fix that here in just a little bit. So what we're going to do is bootstrap that component into the page, and this is going to be what we call the root or the app component. This is the one that loads all the other Lego blocks. So think of it as kind of the parent. It's going to load. Now, once you do this, now behind the scenes, the module loader system can now load all these other scripts that component needs. And I'll kind of show you how that works as we jump in. All right, so let me go into components here real quick, and modules. All right, so first off, there's 2 types of modules. So it is a little bit confusing at first, but it's easy once you know how it works. So first off, you have this way of loading individual files up in the memory. And so I could have a file that is my component that imports 10 other files. All right, now in dev, you'll import those live, so it'll be slower. But when you go to production, you'll bundle all those together, so it's one main script for that, and it just loads a lot faster that way. Then you'll minify it and all that. So we'll be seeing those in the next couple slides here. Now the next type of module is Angular modules. Now these are the ones I just showed you back here. If you go to step 3 there, that is an example of a module. It's basically just a class that has this this new ng model decorator sitting on top of it. Okay, so we'll be seeing that as well. Okay, so it is, when people say, well, what type of modules are you using? And your question should be, well, what do you mean? Do you mean ES6 modules, or do you mean the Angular modules? Because both terms apply, and both are used in your code. But the bottom line is, modules, they're nothing more than tuple. They're just containers that are able to work with our code. So we'll be seeing those here. So let's jump in. So when you compare ES6 modules to Angular modules, ES6 are going to be using some new keywords in the language. When you want to expose something out of a file, you're going to export it. All right, so there's an export keyword. That's kind of, I like to think of it as kind of like putting a public keyword or something. You're basically saying anybody can get to this. The other one you're going to see in a moment is the import keyword. And that's going to import these modules in. I love this feature. Like, I wish we would have had this back when JavaScript first came out. Because again, if you have come from a background where every file was self-responsible, you weren't relying on someone else to get the script tags right. Every file was self-responsible. That's what this is going to buy us. It's awesome. Everything's out of the goal scope. Now, Angular is going to allow you then to, if you have a bunch of components for one feature, let's say you have that orders feature I mentioned, and you need the orders to load maybe dynamically. As they click an orders link, you go back and you download this bundle of feature functionality. It's called lazy loading. Then ng module is going to allow that. You know, think about it. If you have a bunch of modules, or components I should say, that are used for a given feature, like to show orders, how would Angular know to load this component and this, but not this, and this, and you know, you got to bundle it somehow. And so that's what the ng module is going to do for us. It's going to allow us to define right up front for this feature. You know, the orders feature uses X, Y, and Z. It's real clear. And then there's a CLI tool called the Angular CLI now, command line interface, that will allow you to then bundle your code together, which is going to be really cool for production. And so we'll talk about that as well. So let's look at the first type. Let's look at ES6 module real quick here, and then we'll jump into a little demo. So this would be a really simple example of an ES6 class called data service. So this is how you would write actually kind of like an Angular 1 service. You can name it whatever you want, but they're just called services now. Notice the export keyword. That's kind of like saying, hey, it's cool for you to import this class into my other code. Kind of like public or something. Now another piece of code then can import data service from, and then you'll notice you give it kind of a relative path to the file. Now it doesn't look like a file because you notice on the end it just says data.service, but in reality, for my demos, that's going to be data.service.ts. But the way you configure the module loader, you typically tell it the default extension it's called. And at runtime, it'll be a JS file, of course. All right, so this is cool because now this customer's component you see right here is going to be capable of actually automatically loading every dependency it has. Now I'm not relying on anyone else. If I screw it up, it's totally my freaking fault. I can't blame DJ, right? Can't blame DJ over here for like, you didn't get the scripts in the right order, man. Come on. You know, he'd be like, no, man, it's up to you to import it. And that's exactly what the import does. Okay, so that's ES6 in, 2 minutes for the modules. Now, then we have the Angular modules. Okay, so the ES6 modules, they just work under the covers. Right? The Angular modules now gets us into the Angular-ish code, where we want to group related functionality into an Angular module here. So, looks like this. So first off, check out all these imports here. Right? These are the actual pieces of code, and yes, you can import more than one. You just put commas. So a lot of you that have maybe a server-side background in some object-oriented language potentially will go, that pretty much looks like what I did, right? And that's why I like it. I think I get back to my comfort zone, you know? So this is kind of the ES6 way to load the functionality you need. Now notice I'm loading ng module from Angular core. Now Angular core is an actual ES6 module that the Angular team provides for Angular 2. So I'm actually importing from their ES6 module. Now ng module itself is a decorator. So anytime you see an at in front of it, that pretty much means it's metadata about the code. It can do other things, but it's called a decorator. Now notice I'm importing some things here. I'm importing this browser module, basically saying this, whatever this functionality is, and this gives you all your core directives, by the way, and things that you'll use. I want those available to the whole app. Okay, so this is kind of what we call the root module. You'll notice app module down there. This would be my kind of umbrella that they want to import other feature modules into it. Well, by putting browser module at the very top level, kind of that green box I showed you, all the Angular directives are now going to be available to the whole app. So you won't have to now import them again and again. Now, about, well, 3 weeks ago, or whatever it came out, you did have to import it. Whenever a component needed a certain custom directive, you had to actually import that into another component. Well, now, with the new module system, you can now import what you need for that feature, or in this case, maybe it's a simple app. You just have one module for the whole app. And now the imports apply to the whole app. So whatever's in that module is now, it's kind of like I just imported all that functionality just with that one little line of code. Now in a real app, we're going to have a bunch of imports. I have a little more robust app I'm going to show you here in a little bit. Now declarations, what the heck's that? Well, I'm basically telling Angular that, hey, if they use this Lego block called app component, which is imported here, then I want to be able to get to app component. I want to use it. I also want to use custom component. Now, at first I saw this and I went, ah, man, like, honestly, my exact words, I was on Skype with my buddy John Papa, and I said, so what do you think about this? And he goes, I don't know. Because our first thought was, that means every component has to be defined in here. But we were thinking too small. On a larger project, you're going to divide things up into modules anyway. So if you get a huge list here, you're probably doing it wrong. If you start getting a massive list, you might want to think about dividing it up into subsections, sub-modules. And we'll see that as well coming up. So that's kind of what this is. I'm declaring that this module is going to have app component available to use and this whatever custom component is. Now there's the bootstrap. That means app component. That's my root component. That is the container that loads everything else. All right, so that's kind of a quick overview. So any questions so far on the modules here? So yes, sir. Kind of like that, exactly. The question was, is it kind of like in Java when you do bundling and your packages, or .NET has namespaces and DLLs? So it'd be more like in Java, you get your packages are a little higher level. You get your jars though, right? It'd be like your bundle would be like the jar, and then in there you subdivide those into components. Well, I shouldn't say component. We're going to use that term. Aisles, buckets with packages. Or in .NET, they use DLLs and namespaces. Very similar. So when you do the bundling process, you'll actually get a JavaScript file, which you can compare that to like a jar or DLL, but in that file, it might have multiple Angular modules, potentially. So, but yeah, a lot of analogies to that now. Very similar. Now the challenge, if I go back to here, you're going to see it in this library picture, is on the import. If anyone's ever learned a new framework lately, if you're like me, you're just like, oh crap, I gotta go look that up. I can't remember what they call it, And that's what happens, but like anything, you get used to it. And the docs actually are very good now. Has anyone looked at the Angular docs by chance? Overall, they're actually really good compared to Angular 1. They have clunker examples for everything, and they have unit tests for them, and there's all kinds of good stuff. My buddy Ward Bell is leading that team. So what the Angular team did is, so that they can keep focusing on the code, they kind of outsourced the docs, and then they oversee them. And so myself and John and a bunch of people around the world are basically helping to write the docs. And so I think they're actually really good. Not the part I did, my part sucks, but the rest of them are actually really good. But so that's kind of the challenge, because here's what's going to happen. Now you have this library of modules that you can import, right? And now the challenge is, how do I actually get to these modules, and what the heck do they call them? So for instance, that part of the library is Angular Core. This is the one you'll use the most right here. So you might have to import that for some things. Okay? Or maybe you want to do HTTP calls, AJAX. Well, there's a module you import that has called an HTTP module actually inside of that. Angular Common has some of the kind of stuff that's not core, but it's common to the app. Router, that's another part of the library. And then you have third-party stuff. And so I think the challenge for me when I first got started was, imagine this big library, and unfortunately they don't have the sliding ladder. If I ever get rich enough, I'm going to get one of those just because. Where you have that library. Like, all my books are on Kindle anyway, so I don't need it. But, hey, if you have like $1 billion, who cares, right? But anyway, I don't have $1 billion. I'm not even close. Anyway, I'm going to bet on Carvana's when they go public someday, probably. We'll figure that out. But anyway, so moving in, the challenge is, what do you import? And then, of course, you can also import custom modules that are created. So we'll see that. All right, so let's talk about components real quick, and then I'll jump to a demo here. So components, I said, are like Lego blocks. They're the building blocks, and all they are is code and a template. Now, again, if you go back to Angular 1, if you're an Angular 1 person, that's kind of like saying it's a controller and a view. So the concept is the same. The templates are totally different, and the way you write the code is kind of totally different, because now we can use ES6 and TypeScript and stuff like this. Bottom line is, components are all about, you can create reusable tags. The equivalent to that in Angular would be you write custom directives. That's kind of what we're going to do there. All right, so what's in it? It kind of looks like this. You're going to have imports, decorators, and a class. So the imports will be here's what I need. Okay, so this class is self-responsible. I'm no longer relying again on the order of the script tags, or I'm not relying on the bundling process for production, put things in the proper order. Right? It's all self kind of driven. If I forget to put something, my problem. You're going to have decorators. Now this is a decorator that says to use this component, the selector, kind of like a jQuery selector, is the tag name. So this would be the customer's tag, is how you use it. And then there's the template URL for the actual HTML. Or you can embed the template locally. And then finally, you'll have the class that actually does the functionality, calls your services to get data, returns that, and then binds it to the template. So very similar to Angular 1, but this is what we would actually call a directive in Angular 1. Because now you're writing a custom tag, right? Much easier. I don't know if anybody loves those DDO things in Angular 1, directive definition objects. They're like phenomenal when you first start. Like, they're so easy. I'm kidding. They're actually pretty freaking challenging. But, all right, so again, if you got here late, I'll give you a link at the end. You don't really need all these links. You just need one link, and you'll get to all this. So I'm going to run off to this very top link right here. NG2 Starter is just a really simple plunker. So we're going to start playing around real quick. And if you have your laptop, feel free to play, because this will be online, so you can get to it. And then I have another one that's a really simple kind of starter project called Bare Bones. I showed this last time I talked down on Central, but it's been updated quite a bit since then because of all the changes. So we'll talk about that. So let's jump on in here. All right, so let me make sure my plunker's still working on the internet here. Otherwise, this will be a really short demo. Phenomenal cosmic power demo, right? Got to get that out of the way. So this is a component. All right, is that big enough for the back row, that font? You guys get, I don't mean you. You don't count. That's like the nosebleed seats, man. I'm not worried about you, Colin. But anyway, you'll notice very top line there. All right, so I need to import what this Lego block needs. Now again, the goal of a component is to write out a fragment of HTML, kind of like a directive in Angular 1. or React type component. So you'll notice that I'm importing component and on init. What is that? Well, this is actually a TypeScript keyword right here. All right, and this is kind of like an interface. It basically requires me to put stuff in this code, and if I don't, and I screw it up or I case it wrong, I'm going to get a builder, which is awesome. Now as I'm writing, well, I don't write it this way. Plunker's not good to debug, if anyone's trying. But normally, I'll have a console app open, or I use VS Code, or maybe like Sublime Text or whatever. But you know, you can have your little console, and as you save, you'll set up a process that watches your files, and just boom, you'll know right away. Real life example just happened about, what time are we at? 2 hours ago. I tried to update one of the apps I have to show you tonight to RC6. Well, there's a change in one of the routers. They removed the parent API. And before I even ran the app, I just ran the build. Instantly, I was told, parent no longer exists. Because I kind of knew they changed the API, but that's where I went, no, I'm not going to chance of doing that in the next 15 minutes. So I reverted back to RC5. But that is a very, very cool feature if you guys are doing a large code base. Is anybody doing like, how many have apps that have more than 10,000 lines of JavaScript? Anyone? How big? Back row there. What do you think? Yes. No idea? Lots? Anyone know what you have? Impressive. Impressive, yes. Yeah, we'll have a contest now. Well, I have 500,000. You know, somebody will be like, no, I have 999. I was actually at a company, it was all JavaScript, a while back there, a company in, where was I? St. Louis, Missouri. And they had, I think, they were kind of proud about it. And I don't know that you would be proud about the number of lines of code. But they literally were like, we're almost to hit 100,000. And I'm like, yeah, is that a good thing? I don't know. But with what I'm going to be showing you here, when you hit 100,000, good luck with that. Because if it's just pure ES5, yeah, you can do it. And if you have unit tests, and your unit tests are awesome, you'll hopefully catch most of it. There's no way you'll catch all of it. It's too hard to do. I have a Disney example. John works at Disney and kind of told me this one. They, if you go to DCL, DisneyCruiseLine.com, that's written in Angular 1. And TypeScript has this feature where now you can just compile JavaScript actually to JavaScript, which you probably go, why would you do that? Well, because it'll check, hey, you passed in this string, but it looks like the function's using it as a number. And you'll get a builder on that. Well, their app was huge, I guess. And you can go to it right now. If you go to DisneyCruiseLine.com, you'll see it's an Angular 1 app. He had somebody just literally redo it or run it through the TypeScript compiler. Like no changes to the code base at all. They had tons of unit tests, he said, and they caught tons of errors just by running it through the compiler. Because they were passing things they shouldn't have passed, and it was kind of an interesting story. So, all right, so let's get back to this. So what a component does then is allows us to either embed a template. My template is phenomenal, you'll see, but we'll do more here. Okay, or you can have a template URL, and normally if it's a big chunk, I'll link to a separate file, a template. So for this case, just to hopefully see that it's working, I don't have any errors, because I did upgrade this to RC6 about 2 hours ago. Okay, you can see that, phenomenal ability here. Now, what's going on? Well, if we go back to the home page, this is the component right there. All right, app-component has a loading. So while it's still in process of booting up, if you will, it'll show loading, and then as soon as it kicks in, it'll replace the DOM with what you have. Now, again, nothing different than really a custom directive in Angular 1. All right, let's go back here, though. So, this here was my selector. That's why you saw app-component as the tag. Now, just by doing this, you can start to build your Lego blocks. You need a data grid. You do the same thing. You just name the selector data grid, or whatever you want to call it. Maybe it's Carvana.datagrid or something like that, or dash data grid. Maybe a namespace a little bit. You want a different template? Great. Update the template. If it's too big, move it to a separate file. Kind of like we used to do with routing in Angular 1, for those that have done it. All right, now the next thing, you got to have some code that can get data in here, probably, right? So let me do something that I think most of you have done in some form or another. Let's say that we had a message. Now, I'm going to go ahead and use some TypeScript features here because I have the plunker set up to do that. But keep in mind, this is optional. You don't have to use these features. But this is how Angular 2 is actually built. So I'm going to come in and say this.message equals hello world from Carvana. Did I spell that right, Don? I think that's right? All right, got a thumbs up, I think. So now, let's come into here. Some of you may recognize this type of syntax. And we will, embed that piece of data. Okay, Angular 1, yay! One thing that looks the same so far, right? All right, so very simple to do that. Let's show some other things. Let's say that, well, let's just use message. I'm going to shorten it a bit. We'll go back to hello world. Let's say that instead of the H1, I'll just put demo so we know it's working up here. Let's put an input that is the message. Let's look at some of the data binding features here. This is all in the slides, but I get bored with that, so we'll move on. So let's do an input. Normally I'd have type text, whatever, but technically we don't have to. So let's go ahead and come on in and let's do some data binding to this tag. Now, most of us would be used to this. Like that would be the Angular 1 way, right? To kind of bind in a piece of data, and you'll notice it didn't work so well. I mean, I did get that phenomenal text box, but not that great. So the way it works, first off, let me show you some new things. And at first, I don't want anyone running out of the room. Well, unless you're just offended by me, that's okay. But from the syntax I'm going to show you. For those that are new to this, you're going to go, what the heck? We're going to keep this as a family program. I'm going to do this. All right, so we're going to say square bracket value, and it's kind of hard to see probably from the back, but woohoo, yeah. All right, and let's see what happens here. Let's go ahead and to the right, let's echo out message. Okay, so hopefully it'll show on kind of both sides. There we go. And let's type. And nothing. Awesome, right? Well, that's one big change in Angular 1. By default, unless you do otherwise, everything is a one-way binding. Now that's actually a good thing, because some of you probably have been burnt by the key down event that fires every time ng model updates in Angular 1, which is okay, because you might have used ng model options or one of those things, right, to do it. Well, the default, and what this is doing is really, this is doing this. It's bind value as an alternative syntax. And we are binding to the value property of the input. So behind the scenes, a new feature of Angular 2 is they now allow you to bind directly to the DOM property. Right? You no longer need a special directive just to bind data into your controls. As long as there's a DOM property, you can either do this or you can do what most of us like better. And this, you guys are probably familiar that JavaScript properties are always kind of key value pairs, right, in memory. And the indexing is another way you can get to a property value, right? It's kind of why they chose the square brackets. We call that the box. Now, first glance for me when I was new to this was, what the hell? It's like, that's not even legal. It turns out it is, first off. And I'll tell you what, I love it now, and I'll tell you why. Because in your editor, it's really easy now to style certain syntax with different colors and things to make stuff stand out. So now your custom bindings actually really stand out. Now you can do that in Angular 1 too. You could have an ng dash custom color or whatever. But I kind of like it. But it's a one-way binding. Okay? Now, what if I wanted to get data out and update the message property? Because right now it's obviously not updated. Well, we could do that. There's actually an input event that fires every time you input into the input. And the way you bind to events is like this. and then I'll just do a, we'll call it update or something. Now, this is where people start to freak out a little and go, what the heck again? Events, how do you what do you do with events? You call callback functions, and functions are invoked with parentheses. So this is an event binding. Now, if you don't like that, you could do this. You could say on dash input. That's the alternative. But again, I'm kind of good with I'm so used to this now that I got over it, I guess. My take on it is, as a developer, syntax is syntax. I think we've all worked with a language where something was a little weird at first, and you get used to it, you're like, it's fine. Moving on. Okay, so we don't even have an update here, right? So let's go ahead and we could do an update function. Now, one thing new in ES6 is you don't have to put the function keyword when you do an ES6 class. All right, now this could get us the actual data, but I'd have to pass it in. I don't even know if I remember. It's like event dot target, I think, dot value or something like that. Let me see if that's right. I'm going to show you the real way to do it. This is the fake way to do it, and then I'll show you how you really do it. This is the hard way to do it. We'll say we have a val, and then I'm going to say this dot message equals val or something like that. Now, I may not even have this syntax right, and we'll see. Oh, I do. Good. That was a good guess. So now as I type, you'll notice I get kind of what we would call a two-way binding. Way more efficient than Angular 1. And here's why. They still have change detectors, but has anybody had the scenario where you have too many watchers on a page? Nobody ever, right? Never happened. You got to be really careful in Angular 1 because of how the digest cycle fires. With Angular 2, they've completely rewritten that. They've had 5 years of people suggesting better ways to do it, which has got to be fun, right? When you're sitting there, it's like Monday morning quarterback. And the good news is they listen, though. And so they actually got a lot of how this works from React, because React is very high performance on bindings. You can do a lot of bindings, it's very fast. And a lot of this comes from that world. Now, what I just did there, can you imagine doing that for every text box? That would suck. So we're not going to do that. Here's what we're going to do. First off, we're going to take that crap out. We're going to take that crap out. And I'm going to do what you're kind of used to, but I have to tweak it a little bit. Okay, so it's not ng dash anymore. It's all a camel case like it should have been in the first place, because anyone that's done custom directives will know that when you write the directive, it's camel case, but then when you use it, it's kebab case, or I've heard snake case, where you put the dashes. And I don't know about you, I always found that a little weird. It's like, why can't we use it how it's defined? You get used to it though, right? It's just one of those things in Angular 1, you're like, it's fine, I can do it. All right, now is where it's going to get strange for those that have never seen this, but it's awesome. All right, so if I put square brackets around this, what is it doing? What's the square brackets do? Binding one way. So watch, see it worked. But when I type, it doesn't work. So how would I handle when the input changes? Parentheses. Okay, this is called, I didn't make up this term. We actually had somebody get offended by it. Me and John were giving a talk in Vegas one time, and literally somebody left a comment that said we were inappropriate. But this is what it's called, banana in a box. Here's how to remember. You got the box, and then those little curves are either footballs or bananas or whatever you want to call them. If anyone's seen the Saturday Night Live skit, you know what I'm talking about, but I'm not going to go there. So I think a few of you have seen that. It's pretty funny. All right, so let's see what happens. It works. Awesome. This is the equivalent of two-way binding. Now, again, if you're brand new to this, you've never seen it, you might, again, go with what I did, and John did, and Ward did, and everybody did. Go, what the freak is that? Now, you don't have to do that. There's a bind. I won't delete the brackets, but you could do bind on dash if you want. Same thing. But this is the equivalent of a two-way binding. Here's the deal. There is no two-way binding. Data always flows one way in Angular 2. If you want to get data out, you have to raise an event, and then you have a callback that then updates the property. It turns out that's way more efficient than how Angular 1 did. Not to beat up on Angular 1, but that's why some of you have ran into watcher problems. is because Angular 1 would have to set up that watcher and do the digest thingy and apply and loop through all the watchers, and you get the idea. So this is another kind of new thing. Here's another reason I love this. How easy is it to tell your one-way from your two-way from I'm just handling an event? Super easy. So let's do an event here. Let's do real quick just a button. And we'll say submit or something. We're not going to do much with it, but we'll do a button. And how would I then bind? No, there's a click event, right? Back in the old days with JavaScript, some of us used to do this, and I would do like update or something, right? Well, in the DOM spec, a lot of us are used to attributes, like style, for instance. Well, if you go look up the DOM spec, every tag actually has properties and events. Like onClick is actually the name of the behind-the-scenes thing, but the raw event is called click. The raw event for the input changing is called input, as an example. So what you can do now is instead of entry click, we don't need directives for that anymore. I can just wrap this around it, give it a callback. It's called update. I'm going to take out val because I don't really need it. And let's just do, come on, you clicked me, or something like that. Okay, so when the button is clicked, call update, and that'll hopefully update the message instead of hello world to you clicked. Now this right here, that one little trick, can be applied to any DOM event. The square bracket binding can be used to bind to any DOM property. And there's even a way you can bind to attributes. So that's why I said earlier, there's like 43 directives that just die. We don't need them anymore. Awesome. You guys want to bind to an event, instead of having to write a custom directive for that one event, you just bind to it. It's pretty awesome. So, all right, let's see where we're at here. Okay, I think that's right. So let's click it. All right, it worked. You know, you click it. Okay, so there's a lot more we can cover, but alas, we don't have unlimited time. So I'm going to kind of move on. Now, based on just that, any questions so far? Yes, sir?
The entry model bind that just binds the setter of the message, right?
Yes. So basically,
any function or anything.
yeah. Here's what's happening. If you go look up that directive, which is easy to find, all they're doing is subscribing for you to the input event, writing the code to get to that $event.target.value, and then just assign it to the set, or setting the value. Yeah. So again, it looks a little weird at first, but once you get what it does, and you get that the square brackets binds the value to the value property, and then the parentheses get the data out, then it actually is super cool. Because now I can look at your code and instantly say how many one-way bindings you have, how many two-way bindings you have. And that's harder to do in some of the other frameworks, including Angular 1. It's because everything's two-way by default in Angular 1. So
based on what he's saying, if you put, instead of any model, if you just put value there,
yep.
you get the initial value method updates.
That's right. That's right. So if you did like I did with the square brackets, that's all you can do, because value is a property. So you're setting. So to get it out of the control, you bind to the input event. But then you gotta do that goofy code I wrote, that event.target.value, So you're kind of back to like vanilla JavaScript almost. That's actually what they're doing. That's why the performance is really good though, because there's no hoops to jump through with the digest and all that. They do have a change detector system, but it's very different. Think of it this way. Has anyone ever hit the digest max before? The max is 10. Anyone ever hit it? I have, accidentally. It's because I was stupid. I had a recursive function, set a property would set itself. And what will happen is you'll get an error in Angular 1 because the digest cycle keeps thinking property change, property change, property change. Well, the reason it has to keep looping in Angular 1 to detect changes is because they didn't have a super robust dirty checker. And if first name changed, they had to loop again because that might have affected full name, which affected, some other property, which affected, it's called side effects. Well, in Angular 2, data only flows one way. It doesn't flow sideways, it flows down. So if you're in a parent component and a child binds to a property, the only thing they have to check now is that one branch of the tree. They don't have to check everything else. Whereas in Angular 1, they had to, because they didn't know if that had a side effect. So that's why they're doing this trick. And I think I saw another, was there another hand up? Yes, sir. No, I'm sorry, sir, you're not allowed to. Security? He's a good friend of mine.
Yeah, if I have, I mean, if I don't have the on it, implement on it, but I have the ng on it, but it's the life cycle, it's the
Yeah, I haven't talked about that yet. Good question. So the implements thing is optional, first off. Has anybody used interfaces much in another language? Okay, so think of it, it's an interface basically. It's actually technically an abstract class, but an abstract class is like an interface. And if you're new to that, all that means is there's a code contract I've now signed that says you will have an ng on init, and if you don't, you're going to get a builder. Okay, and here's why you want this, and here's why I love TypeScript. Because if I take this off, maybe, there we go, and let's say I accidentally did that. All right, let's let it reload here. Notice the data didn't work. All right, so now you're in the Chrome DevTools trying to figure out what the freak's going on, right? Well, so I did this before, and I think I wasted an hour that day going down the wrong rabbit holes. I'm all thinking my AJAX call failed, or my server wasn't returning the right data. You know how this is, right? You go down the rabbit hole, and you're like, son of there's no rabbit in this hole, and then you're down the next one. Well, by doing what we just saw, you'll actually get, if I had the compiler thing hooked up, which we don't. Well, we do, but it's in the browser right now. If I implement on init, if you use TypeScript, you will now get a builder. And it'll basically say, hey, you didn't satisfy the contract. And then you'll go, what do you mean? Oh, yeah, I didn't do this. So that's kind of what that is. Now, what is ng on init? Well, let me show you an alternative here. Another thing some of you have probably seen in ES6 is you have constructors now in your classes. So a lot of people would say, well, why don't you just put this code right here? And it should still work, barring typos. Okay, and it does. You see it shows. And the answer is, if anybody does unit testing much, if you start hard-coding dependencies in your constructors, it's a lot harder to unit test. Now you're getting out the crowbar to figure out how the heck you're going to work around this. So that's why they made an ng on init. Well, that's one reason. But the second reason is it also kind of provides an obvious name for, hey, this initializes the component. So going back to what you were saying, you don't have to have that for the life cycle, but let's just say you always will. You should. You should. No, well, in this case you would get a builder, but let's say you took off the implements part, then you don't need it. So now if you're like, oh, okay, get out of here, bud. So now if you're like, I'm just going to use the constructor, it'll work. It's just going to be a little harder to test if you're writing unit tests. So yeah, good question. So yeah.
So the reason why you put parentheses on the text is because you're pulling data from the update method
The reason is that click, and I literally had to go look up the, does anyone ever go to developer.mozilla.org or whatever it is? That's like my go-to, docs. I literally had to go look up some of the DOM objects because we get so used to directives like in Angular 1 or other frameworks that you kind of, forget the actual real web under the covers. So click is actually an event. By putting the parentheses, I'm saying when click fires, now Angular will do this code to then wire it up to the callback function. So literally, I had never used the input event before, ever. Some of you might have. I always did like a key up or key down or one of those events. And then it turns out there's this input event, and I was like, one day I'm like, never heard of that one. So literally, I've had to go to the Mozilla site. Sometimes I'll have to actually look up what properties are on this tag, because you can bind to any of the properties. You can even bind to attributes. I'll show you real quick. If it's not a property, and sometimes you got to go look this up, because sometimes they have properties. Attributes normally are kind of wrappers around properties, but sometimes you'll just have attributes with no backing property. And you can also bind to those. You do attr dot name of property, oops, equals something. And that says I would like to bind to an attribute called, I said name of property, sorry, name of attribute. So a real life example would be like this. attr dot, well, actually title I think you can bind to directly, but like that. I think title actually is a property though, so you can just bind it directly. But anytime you try to do this, and you're positive your code is right, and you have some thing in here, if it doesn't work, it probably means it's an attribute. So then all you do is you do attr dot, and now you're binding the attribute. So, okay, good questions. Let's take one more, and then we'll move on here. How we doing? You guys awake after work? Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, if everybody can do me a favor, I don't know if they told you, but this is also an exercise talk, so everybody drop, give me 50 push-ups, please, to wake up. I need to do that. We got a basketball hoop, hey, we can play basketball. But, all right, so square brackets are for property binding, parentheses are for event binding, and if you see both, which you'll pretty much only see that normally for ng model, unless you write a custom directive, which you could. Then if you see both, then it's a two-way binding, but there is no such thing as two-way, technically. All right, yes, sir?
In that case, could you replace the model with value?
No, because value doesn't have it. So the question was, in this case, let's kind of show that, because that's a great, I asked the same question when I learned it. Could I do that? The reason that won't work is value is only a property. Value is not an event. So the parentheses part would fail because there's nothing to bind to. ng model is basically doing both. Under the covers, if you look at the code, it's actually binding with the square brackets to the value property, but the parentheses actually are binding to the input event. And that's why it don't work. I asked the same exact thing. In fact, I had Brad Green in the audience. You want to get more nervous, have the director of the team that writes this in the audience for a talk. That was fun. Because every time a question, this is like when it first came out, every time a question come up, I'd be like, that's a great question. Brad, what do you think? The funny thing is, a lot of times you go, I don't know. So, he's the director. He's not writing the code, but he's awesome. Brad's awesome. But, all right, so, oh shoot, you're recording this, aren't you? You're going to delete that part. I don't want Brad seeing that. Hey, Brad, you are awesome. You are phenomenal. Okay. So, let's move on here because we're not going to get through everything if I don't. What time are we at? 8? Okay, perfect. So we'll keep going here. So, if you have any other questions, hold off and we'll get back to them. Oh, let me show you the bare bones. So, if you want an actual project, and I'll show you some basics here. So, this is up on GitHub. Let me zoom this a little bit. Close that guy. So, the source here has the Angular app, so you still see the Angular folder. I am following kind of a feature-based code organization, which a lot of you probably do in whatever framework you use now. It's pretty common. There's my module, a little bit of routing. There's my root component. Okay, so if I open this, you guys will recognize this. It's just a little bit more code. That's my root module. Now, it does mean, yeah, I'm doing all those imports, but if you wouldn't have done this, you'd have to have all the script tags. At least now, I know exactly what I need. And at runtime, there's a module loader. I'm using System.js, but you could use Webpack. Anybody use Webpack? So you could use Webpack, System.js. There's even others out there. ES6 module loader. But they will take care of going and finding all of these modules. These are all configured in the configure the app. So these are all, by the way, all of Angular is npm, which I love. So it's all npm install to get everything going. You don't have to go to Bower or here or NuGet or it's all npm. Just as a heads up. So I did have to configure, but that's why I have this project for you guys. I did have to configure, what does Angular core mean? Like, where's it go for that? So I have to, in the config file, you'll see a system.js config right here. That's where I tell it, hey, when you see this, go to this node modules folder. And then it will grab the bundle, it's called.
Is that what the app symbol is?
No, the app symbol is actually a little NPM thing they do. You might have seen it for versioning, for instance. You can do like at, 1.6, and that'll go grab that version. It's actually related to an NPM feature. But technically, you can configure however you want to name it, but this is how you're supposed to do it right here. So, yeah, it's a little NPM feature that they're leveraging. So, all right, so how cool is that this code is all self-contained? Now, I'm importing all the Angular directives. We're going to see a few of those. Forms. I don't know, I'm not even using forms here, but I'm ready for them. HTTP, AJAX support. Routing, my custom routes. Okay, now my custom routes, just to show you real quick, are right here. Notice the export. Okay, so this app routing, what you saw in the module, is this router module. So everything's a module now. If you want forms functionality, you import the forms module. If you want routing, you import the routing module. You import, you import, you import. Now this is the part that, me personally, I got to learn the lay of the land on the road trip here and figure out, so what's out there? What do they have? And that's where you just got to break down and read the docs a little bit. Let me actually show you real quick. How many have actually seen the docs much in Angular 2? I know some of you are doing it. Okay, good. There'll be a quiz afterwards and you guys are in charge. So, if we come on in, the new site is called angular.io. And let me show you the best thing you need to bookmark. In fact, if I go to my API doc bookmarks, right there, because I go there a lot, because it's still new. So if I go to docs, over here on the left, you'll see API reference. And this is pretty cool. They have a searchable thing. So if I just want to see directives or decorators or classes or interfaces, it'll filter down for you. I'm going to do all. And now if I wanted to find out, what the heck is a component? The decorator. I can say component, and now there's the, then I can even click, I don't want that, I want decorator. And there it is. Okay, now I can drill down in, get some docs. What I love is in the right-hand corner, bottom right. This is the actual source for that. And so sometimes the docs, they haven't done it yet. It's still not released and they're working on it. So sometimes you'll find something you want to use and you're like, I have no freaking idea how to use this. So what I do is I'll go to here and go, okay, great, there's nothing. So I'll run off to here, view the source code on GitHub, and try to study what's up. And I've actually learned a ton on how things work. That's how I know how ng model works and stuff like that, because I've been bored enough to go click it and figure out what it's doing. So that's kind of where you can go. Now they also, if you're new to this, they have a really nice tutorial. My buddy John wrote this part of it. Then they have a bunch of dev guides right here and basics. You wanted to learn about these lifecycle hooks like ng on init that we talked about. That's all in there. And there's a bunch of others. There's a destroy, ng on destroy when it dies, and all kinds of stuff. You want to learn about AJAX calls. You want to learn about data binding, animations. It's all there. So really good doc so far. All right, so let me go back to this app real quick here and just show you that what I did in Plunker is what's going on here. So this app is very impressive. Let me see where we're at here. I thought I had one open. Nope. All right, let me open another command prompt here. All right, so let me do an npm start. That's how these demos of mine will always start up. Should fire up the browser here, I hope. And, all right, so this is one thing that drives me crazy is when you get a seed project, they call them, a starter project, that actually is, you start looking at it and you're like, holy crap, there's 100 files in this starter project, and it's like, geez, I just want to learn the basics. Well, that's why I call it bare bones. Now, it does have the basics. I have a really simple 1 or 2 routes. I have 2 components, 1 module, and that's it. And that's pretty much it. So it's very basic. It does this. There's your feature, whatever that is. And you can go back. So if you guys are interested, this will be in the slides, and it's a really nice way if you just want to play locally. You can be up and running literally in about 30 seconds minus the npm install, which takes probably about 30 seconds. So we'll say 60 seconds. You can be up and running, depending on your network, I guess. Okay, so the chart I showed, let me go back to here now. This guy, hopefully starting to make a little more sense. Okay, so you saw, I just showed you the module for that little app. Oh, yeah, it's waiting on me. And then that had some routes that loaded the component. That showed that home page that didn't do much. That was just your template and your code. Now I can have services, which we'll get to in a moment. And then we looked at a little bit of this stuff. Now there's some directives I'm going to show you here as well. So hopefully that makes a little more sense compared to what we did. So let me show you a couple directives real fast. Let's say that we had, let's just do string array really quick here. Let's do names. We'll say that's a string array equals, and let's do run, and Bob, and really hard names to type. Dawn. Did I spell your name right, Dawn? I think that's right. Okay, so you guys have all, if you've done Angular, probably done an ng repeat. So I'll just show you that really fast. It's a little bit different. It's a lot faster though. So you can do an li, and we're used to ng repeat equals something like that, right? Okay, ES6 has a new loop called a for loop. It's a different type of for loop though. The ES5 has a for loop that's just for properties typically. So ES6 has a new one. So they have an ng4 cust of, this is following ES6 standards. So, you know, we're used to, if you've done this before, it's in usually, and then it would be names, but it's actually of names. I don't know why, well, we'll call it cust, that's fine. And then I could do write out cust, well, just cust, it's just a string. li, and we'll hopefully see if I have any typos here, but we'll hopefully get a names. Okay, there we go. Phenomenal. So this is a little weird, but it's really cool what they're doing. So a new feature that's coming to browsers is going to be a new tag called template. And under the covers, Angular's smart enough to leverage this new way of, you know, li right here. It's just a template. So under the covers, they're actually embedding this in a template type tag. A lot of us have used script tags, you know, over the years to hide our HTML code, because that was the way you did it. And what the star means, I know that looks weird, but it's actually kind of cool. It tells you that this is a structural directive. Now, what's that? It basically means this directive will modify the DOM. Therefore, you should be worried about performance, because it's a DOM modifier. Right? And that's kind of what that means. It also means under the covers, it's going to be using templates to do some things, which is kind of cool. All right, now there's others. There's an ng-if still. A lot of you have done ng-if, I suspect. There's ng-style, ng-class, ng-switch. But there's not that many more, because most of the directives in Angular 1 are related to like events and stuff. We don't need those anymore. We just do the bindings. So, okay. So I want to show that. Now, I'm going to skip forward. A lot of what I covered is in the slides. So I'm going to skip through these really quick here and get to the one more big meaty thing, and then we'll do a couple littler ones. So here's the you know, the one-way binding. I'm actually binding like to this disabled property. If I want to disable a button, you don't have to do ng-disable. There's already a DOM property. Why not leverage it? I can bind to the hidden. I can bind to a class. But I'm going to say I want to set the active of the class. I want to set the active class, I should say, on the div if isActive is true. Okay, so that would be a way that you could dynamically bind and add the active class based on the isActive being true. And then there's an ng class if you want to set multiple classes. This only does one. We talked about events, so I'm going to kind of skip forward here. There's the banana in the box. We'll come up with your term. ng4, here's an ng if, only show the div if there's a customer. If it's null, undefined, empty string, false, it's not going to, it'll hide it, just like in Angular 1. Now they do have what we would call filters in Angular 1, but they're called pipes. Now they have completely eliminated the performance problem filters. There is no order by, there is no filter anymore. The reason is if you didn't know it, anytime you do the pipe, it's pretty awesome, but in Angular 1, that'll actually cause the digest to run at least twice because of the pipe. So it's actually a little bit of a performance problem most people don't know about. You know, you see all, I love these blog posts. Angular's slow. And I'm always like, well, let's look at the code. You know, they got like 50,000 watchers in there and tons of pipes everywhere, and then they wonder why it's slow. Well, that's because you need to learn how it works. What they've done in Angular 2 is really simplified. I would call it formatters. Really, it's more about formatting data, but that's because of some other frameworks I've worked with that calls them formatters. But there's a currency. This will write out USD currency. The true here means actually write out the $sign. You can switch that out dynamically and bind it to like the, whatever the, I have to look it up. Japan's what, JPN I think, or something like that. DE for German. And so you can bind to those and it'll actually write out the appropriate symbol. Whereas in Angular 1, you'd have to use ng-translate or some I18N directive. Some of you, anybody have to do that, multilingual ones? It's fun, huh? I haven't had to do it, I'll admit. I don't take those projects. I'll refer them to you. Like, I don't like that. You got to know what you're doing. All right, let's talk about services real quick. So we've talked about components, and you've seen data binding, but you know, just like Angular 1, and just like any framework, you don't want to put all the code into the component. Right? You want them to be thin. So what we're going to do for reuse is we're going to delegate to a service. Now, a service is the simplest thing you can write. It literally is a class. Now notice this private HTTP of type HTTP. Well, that's a little bit of TypeScript there. The private is TypeScript, and the :HTTP is TypeScript. You can do this in ES6 too, but just not that hard. So first off, notice what I imported up top. And the module has already imported the HTTP module. That means everything's ready to go. This is your dependency injection. Anytime you have a constructor in a service class that needs injectables in it, you put this injectable on top. Now, technically, if I didn't have this right here, I could just remove this. But the recommendation that the Angular team, and they now have an official style guide already for Angular 2, which is kind of interesting because it's not out yet. But it'll be changing. But they're recommending that you just always put this, even if you don't have any injectables. Most people read this as data service is injectable. That's not what it means. It means data services constructor has injectables. So if there's nothing being injected into the constructor at runtime, like the bubble says, then you technically can leave it off. I wouldn't. Here's why. As soon as you leave it off, somebody then puts this, and they can't figure out why the app won't work. You know, and then you have to know what the error is and go, oh shoot, I need injectable. So the recommendation is just on all your service classes, your singletons, always put the injectable on top. All right. Now let's look just real quick at a simple call to like RESTful services. Now this changes a little bit, well not a little bit, quite a bit actually. There's a functional programming type feature in Angular 2 they're leveraging very, very heavily. Is anyone using RxJS in here by chance? Okay, super cool. It's reactive programming. It's like really, really flexible. They have something called observables. Now, an observable is actually a really simple concept. Imagine that I'm a server, and let's pretend that it's not even Ajax. Let's pretend it's WebSockets. If you're not familiar with that, it basically means I can push data to the browser as the server changes. It's a TCP/IP connections for real-time data. It's awesome. Imagine that I don't know how much data is going to be pushed though. So I want to hook up to the server and not just listen once, which is what promises do, I want to listen for a bunch of changes into the future. All right, so it's kind of like an array of items into the future. An observable would observe the data coming in, and then as the data comes in, it would then notify you, hey, got data, and it could be 10 seconds later, it could be an hour later. What's cool about them is, number one, you can listen for more than one thing. Promises, you can't do that, right? Promises, once the promise is resolved, you're done. Observables are data over time. All right, now you might say, I'm just doing Ajax, it's one response. Well, they still use observables. The other thing you can do with observables is you can cancel. Now, it's not going to cancel the server, not unless you set something up. But on the client side, now when it does come back, if you cancel it, it just doesn't happen. You can't cancel promises per se. You know, you throw errors or you do some other thing to cancel a promise. So what this is doing here is saying, hey, go get me customers and then map the result to of the response to allow me to get to the JSON. Now, why am I calling .map there? Well, what did I say an observable does? It watches, this is a simplified explanation, but it watches an array of items over time. How many of you use the map function in JavaScript for arrays? It's awesome, right? For those that haven't, it's a way to map an array to a different array, basically. And so what I'm doing here is I'm saying, hey, map the response, and what do we got going here? Well, some of you might recognize this from ES6. Some of you might recognize this from other languages. This is a new ES6 feature. This is this kind of response bracket here, all the way to right there. That's a method, but it's an anonymous method. So instead of doing the embedded function like we do, that's anonymous for a callback, this is it's called some people call it the fat arrow syntax. Some people call it just the arrow syntax. Some people call it lambdas. It's basically the same as you guys have all done when you have a callback. It's just a short version of it. It's a new ES6 feature. All right, so all I'm doing is saying, hey, go get me the customers, and then get me the JSON from that response, which will then get you the customers array. Okay, and then I have a catch that. Now, how would you subscribe? Well, in promises, we would say .then, right? Well, an observable is kind of like if DJ, let's say DJ, you keep throwing, we could even emulate this. We got ping pong balls over here. He keeps throwing ping pong balls at me, you know, and then I'm like, man, can you take care of him? You know? I am observing. I want these ping pong balls. I'm observing DJ. Well, if I'm not looking at him, I'm probably not going to get the balls, right? So I need to subscribe to DJ. Now he gets new data coming in maybe every 10 seconds. When he gets data, he tosses a ball to whoever's listening, whoever subscribes. So if you've ever done the publish subscribe pattern before, that's what observables pretty much are. All right, so it looks like this. Take a look at this .dataService.get customers. That's what I just showed on the last slide. Okay? Subscribe to the data. There's the customers. This is the TypeScript part. Again, a shortcut function. And then take those customers and assign them up to my customers array property. Now those would probably bind to an ng repeat, or that's old. Freudian slip, an ng4 in your template there. So what's different is when you subscribe, you can unsubscribe. So if it's just an Ajax call, you're only going to get one piece of data back. But if anybody in here does get into like WebSockets where it's a stream of data, that's really what observables are about, is a stream of data over time. Now, anytime that service gets data, since you subscribe, I can now catch the ping pong balls. All right. Whereas with promises, you could throw me one ping pong ball, and I'm like, thanks so much, I'm out of here. All right. Then you keep tossing to nobody, because that's not how promises. You'd have to resubscribe to the promises. So this is a new. This uses RxJS. I won't have time to go into that, but it's called reactive extensions. But that, well, right here, that is all it takes to write a service in Angular 2. It's really simple. The Ajax call part, I'll admit, it takes a little getting used to, but it's like super powerful compared to what we had in the old days, like yesterday. Pretty powerful stuff. All right. Now let me show you routing and then we'll wrap up. This is the last part here. So the way routing works is very similar to Angular 1, but if you look at this code here, notice I have my paths. Still use route parameters, very similar. But notice instead of giving it the controller and the view, I give it the component, the Lego block. Okay, so it's actually, I think, simplified. Now, when they navigate to that route, it's going to shove that component's tag, the selector, into what we used to call ngView. It's now called router outlet. Router outlet is where the router kind of, I don't know, allows you to plug things into the page, I guess you could say. Now, for those that have ever had a route that when you navigate to it, you wanted to load multiple pieces of data into the page. Not just one view, but maybe 3 views simultaneously. You'll know that Angular 1 router doesn't support that. So that's why a lot of you might use UI router, because it can do that. Angular 2's router will not only support that, but it also will now support, as of about a month ago, lazy load. Now you can have a module that when the home page loads, that module never loads. It's just sitting there on the server ready. When they click a link, the routing can be set up, and I have an example of this at the end I'll run. The router can be set up to say, okay, now go get this module. Now, yeah, it'll take a second to go download that module on the fly, and now you have that new piece of functionality. And that was probably one of the most requested features for whoever had the, well, it was Don, I think, had the big, 500,000 lines of code or whatever. You can't load all that up front. Right? You got to break it into modules. So that's now going to be supported when you define your paths. Literally what you'll do is right here you'll put quotes around it. And what that will do is when it sees quotes, it'll go, oh, that's dynamic. And then it'll figure it out. So I'll show you a demo that uses that coming up. Now, notice I'm importing router module. That automatically gives me access to the route features. This is kind of like an interface again. If I have a typo in here, I'm going to get a build error because I said it's of type routes. So again, anyone coming from a more object-oriented background with types, it's very powerful for large apps. Optional. You don't have to use it, but I love it. And then the way you can link the routes is like this. So notice back here I had a route called orders, like orders/1. And then that's going to load orders component. Well, from another view, how would you link to that route and load the orders component? It's called router link. This is the one directive. There's only one, actually, that you need to know to do any linking to a route. That's it. And that will automatically build the route. Now, could you use like the href? You could. There's ways you can do that as well, but this is the official way that you'll want to do routing. So the array that you see here obviously matches orders/customer ID. And then you can get that customer's orders. There's also a pipe being used, a capitalized pipe. It's a custom one I made. Okay, so to review, and then I'll show you one more demo here, and we'll get you out of here. So we have this module that can be used to load routes. Routes will define, again, the component. We know the component is code. It has all that cool data binding stuff we talked about. Services are really simple. They're just classes that typically have injectables in them. The service itself can be injected into components. If I went back to the slide, it showed that. And then, of course, we still have directives like ng-for, ng-if, ng-class, ng-style, ng-switch. Those are still in the template language. Or you can load custom components, custom Lego blocks. Pretty cool. So let me show you a kind of a final demo here, and we'll call it a night. So let's see. Well, I have to open that a different way. So I probably shouldn't show it because all the other ones worked. So hey, it's been fun. Any questions? All right, this one's a little more robust. The bare bones is not too impressive. Now, those that came to the other talk, I showed this there too, but this has been significantly updated. This has lazy loading and all that. Let me show you that real fast. Yes. No, that's not it. Yeah, see that? So when they go to the customer/ID route, I would like to load a child module. That's what load children is. I give it the path to the module file. That downloads it dynamically now when they go that route. So when this app first loads, that feature is not available. Not until they navigate to it will it download it. That's awesome. Anybody that has a large app, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because it's kind of hard to do in Angular 1. So, yes, sir.
Is that just for like one module, or that setting up multiple modules? Like, what is
That module might load other modules.
Okay.
Yeah, so it depends. In fact, I am loading other modules with this module. It's just the parent feature module, but then that feature module might load like a custom services module into it. So it's kind of like a whole chain. Yeah, so let me see if I can get this going real quick. Let's see, open terminal. So to run these, there's a README in the GitHub. You know, you just run npm install, npmi, and then you should be able to do npm start. This is the one I tried to upgrade to RC6, but there was one feature I have to update, and I didn't want to risk it. All right, so it's an app that basically shows customers. Some of you will recognize it if you came to the other top. But now it's all updated to almost RC6. Tomorrow I'll have to fix a feature. It basically allows you to have different views of the data, has sorting, has custom filtering, and then it also has nested routes where it dynamically loads the child module. So right at this point, if you looked at the network calls, there is no ability to display the orders for this customer, or I can't even click or edit that customer yet. There's no code for that. But as soon as I click on this, it now just loaded, which it was local, so it was fast. But it now just loaded that module dynamically. Now I have what's called nested routes, child routes. If you look up at the top here, you can see customer/3/orders, details, edit. There's an example in here of validation. Some of you have probably done this in Angular 1 with forms. Angular 2 is much more powerful actually for this. Pretty good. I like it. So anyway, pretty much all the cool features in Angular 2 are in the app in some way, shape, or form. I just try to keep them simple. You know, dynamically loading modules, child routes, using services, making AJS calls. You know, all this is calling a server to get the data behind the scenes. So this is all up on GitHub. I'll update it hopefully to RC6 here, maybe by the weekend. And those that are interested that'll give you a nice little app to get started with. All right, so I hope everybody, now that you've kind of seen the big picture here, has a pretty decent idea of kind of where things are going. The data binding again, yeah, it's different. I love it. Once you get used to it, it's pretty awesome. So that's all I have. If you have any questions, stick around, but thanks for coming. I appreciate it.